All right, let's talk about a book that completely changed the game for so many people when it comes to personal finance. I'm talking about Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It's one of those books that really makes you stop and rethink everything you thought you knew about money.
You know the advice we all got from our parents, right? Study hard, get good grades, and you'll get a good, safe job. For generations, that was the formula for success. But is it? The book kicks off by throwing that whole idea into question. I mean, think about it. The richest people in the world, guys like Bill Gates, they didn't just get rich by getting good grades. And that question is really what this whole book is about.
So the entire story is told through the eyes of the author, Robert Kiyosaki, and he says he grew up with two dads. There was his actual father, who he calls his poor dad, a really smart, highly educated guy who was actually the head of education for the state of Hawaii. And then there was his best friend's dad, his rich dad, an entrepreneur who, believe it or not, never even finished the 8th grade. And both of these men gave him advice about money, but their advice couldn't have been more different.
And wow, this slide right here, it just nails the huge difference in how they saw the world. Poor Dad said, study hard so you can find a good company to work for. It's all about job security, right? Being a great employee. But Rich Dad's advice just flips that on its head. He said, study hard so you can find a good company to buy. One is about working for the system, and the other is about owning it. A totally different game.
And this difference in thinking, it's seeped into everything. Poor Dad would say things like, the love of money is the root of all evil. But Rich Dad, he'd say, no, the lack of money is the root of all evil. When faced with something expensive, Poor Dad's brain would just shut down and say, I can't afford it. Rich Dad's brain would fire up and ask a question. Okay, how can I afford it? One mindset is about avoiding risk at all costs, the other is about learning how to manage it.
So where did this all start for him? Well, it kicked off when he was just 9 years old. He and his best friend Mike got left out by some of the wealthier kids in the neighborhood because, they were the poor kids. And that moment just lit a fire under him. He went home and asked his dad, Dad, can you teach me how to get rich? So what do? At 9 years old, Robert and Mike start their first business. And it was creative. They went around the neighborhood collecting old lead toothpaste tubes, melted them down over a grill, and started pouring the liquid metal into these little molds to make their own nickels. I mean, they were literally making money. Of course, they had no idea they were also committing a felony.
Yeah, as you can imagine, that little counterfeiting operation got shut down pretty quick by his dad. But his dad wasn't really mad. He was actually impressed that they took initiative. And then he gave his son maybe the most important piece of advice ever. If you really want to learn about money, go talk to Mike's dad, the man who would become his rich dad.
So the boys go to Rich Dad, and he agrees to teach them. But the very first thing he wanted them to understand was how to escape this, the rat race. And you know exactly what this is. It's that endless loop. You get a job to pay the bills, you make more money, you spend more money, your taxes go up, you have to work even harder to keep up, and you never, ever get ahead. You're just stuck on a hamster wheel.
Rich Dad's teaching methods, while they weren't exactly traditional, he told them, I'll teach you, but not like in a classroom. Instead, he offered them a job. They'd work in one of his convenience stores for 3 hours every Saturday. And the pay? A whopping 10 cents an hour. This was lesson number 1, and they didn't even have a clue.
So after 3 long, boring hours of dusting off canned goods, this is what they made. 30 cents. And even back in 1956, that was nothing. It was just enough to buy like 3 comic books, and that's it. You can just imagine how a 9-year-old kid would feel about that deal.
So a month goes by, a whole month. Robert's giving up his Saturdays, he's missing his baseball games, he's doing this mind-numbing work for basically no money. And the whole time, Rich Dad hasn't said a single word to him about getting rich. He felt completely ripped off, like he was just being used for cheap labor. He was ready to walk. So he marches into Rich Dad's office, totally fed up, and just lets him have it. He tells him he's a cheapskate, a liar, a crook, that he broke his promise, that he was breaking child labor laws. I mean, he just unloaded on the guy.
And Rich Dad just sits there, calmly lets him finish his tirade. And then he finally reveals the first lesson. He says, I am teaching you. He explained that life is the greatest teacher, but it doesn't just stand up and give you a lecture. It just pushes you around. And every single push is life trying to tell you something. It's saying, hey, wake up. There's something I want you to learn. So that insulting 10-cent an hour wage, that was the push. It was designed specifically to make Robert feel angry and frustrated. Why? Because Rich Dad explained that most people's entire financial lives are controlled by two emotions, fear and greed. The fear of not having money keeps them stuck in a job they hate, and then greed, or desire, makes them chase a bigger paycheck, which just keeps them trapped in that rat race.
See, this is the choice Rich Dad was showing him. When life pushes you, you can fall into the trap. You can blame your boss, you can blame the low pay, you can blame your job, or you can choose the escape. You can realize that you are the only thing you can actually change. You can stop and ask, what is this trying to teach me? How can I get smarter from this? And that's where the real power is.
And this whole crazy experience led to Rich Dad's #1 rule, maybe the most important lesson in the whole book. It's this: the poor and the middle class work for money. They trade their time, their skills, their life for a paycheck. It's a direct trade. But the rich, they do it completely differently. They have their money work for them. And how do they do that? They spend their time buying and building assets, things like businesses, real estate, stocks, things that put money into their pocket, whether they're physically working or not. Their money is out there working 24/7 to make them more money. That's the secret.
And that right there, that fundamental shift in perspective, is what Rich Dad, Poor Dad is all about. It's about unlearning that poor dad way of thinking, just get a safe job, and learning the rich dad mindset, how to build real wealth and get your freedom back.
And that brings us to the big question for all of us, really. Rich Dad taught that most people make all their career choices based on fear, the fear of not being able to pay the bills. But when you learn to have your money work for you, you're finally free to